Morgan Freeman reveals the 6 Golden Age actors who were actually evil. Hollywood's Golden Age sparkled with beauty, grace, and myth. Its stars glowed larger than life, faces painted in light, voices captured in silver. But behind the studio gates, beneath the charm and cigarette smoke, there were shadows deeper than anyone wanted to see. Fame, after all, is a kind of disguise. The camera forgives, the public forgets. But history, if you look closely enough, does not. Morgan Freeman, a man whose own legacy is built on dignity and gravity, has often spoken about the power of storytelling to reveal truth. In this imagined reflection, we revisit the actors he once described as idols with dark hearts, the ones whose on-screen warmth hid cruelty, whose fame protected them from consequence. These were not just difficult personalities. They were symbols of the industry's moral amnesia. Their stories are reminders that talent and virtue do not always share the same stage. So now we open the velvet curtain, not to celebrate them, but to understand them. To look at how beauty and darkness shared the same frame, how charm could mask brutality, and how Hollywood's legends became cautionary tales for generations that followed. These are the 6 Golden Age icons whose brilliance hid something far darker. The ones Morgan Freeman believes history should remember, not for their fame, but for their cruelty. Errol Flynn, the adventurer who lived like a predator.
It's for you. Brand new and paid for.
Errol Flynn was Hollywood's golden swashbuckler, hero of Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood. But off-screen, his charm was weaponized. Behind the parties and the laughter, there were accusations of violence and manipulation that dogged him for decades. Freeman once said that Flynn played freedom on screen but practiced cruelty in life. Flynn's exploits weren't just excess, they were predation, masked by fame and a studio's protection. Flynn embodied the fantasy of reckless freedom. To audiences, he was courage personified, a man who swung from chandeliers and laughed in the face of danger. But the danger was often real and not confined to the screen. His private life blurred the lines between performance and possession. Friends described him as magnetic but merciless, a man who treated others as props in his endless performance. The tabloids of the time called him Hollywood's wildest man, yet what they printed was only half the story. In the early 1940s, Flynn's reputation faced a reckoning when accusations of assault surfaced. Studios rallied to protect him. Warner Brothers spent millions suppressing details, buying silence, and crafting counter-narratives. The courts acquitted him, and the crowd cheered when he walked free. Freeman reflected that Hollywood forgave Flynn because the camera loved him. It was a chilling truth. The audience wanted the myth, not the man. Behind closed doors, he drifted deeper into self-destruction. Alcohol, manipulation, and a growing sense of invincibility defined his final years. Those who knew him best spoke of his cruelty toward women, his disregard for boundaries, his belief that charm erased consequence. Even his friends began to fade away, exhausted by his appetites. In the end, Errol Flynn didn't just play a hero, he performed innocence so well that people mistook it for truth. His smile became a mask, his legend a shield. And when the curtain finally fell, what remained was not the adventure, but the damage it left behind. Joan Crawford, the star who demanded love through fear.
Get your things out of this house right now before I throw them into the street and you with them. Get out before I kill you.
Joan Crawford defined glamour, but behind her immaculate poise lay control and terror. The stories of her parenting, later immortalized in Mommy Dearest, painted a portrait of a woman broken by vanity. Freeman reflected that Crawford's beauty was carved from pain, and she shared that pain like a weapon. She ruled her home the way she ruled a set, with icy precision and unbearable pressure. Stardom was her armor and her curse. Crawford's ascent through the studio system was a study in reinvention. Born Lucille Lesueur, she crafted Joan Crawford from ambition alone, a name chosen by contest, a persona sculpted by will. MGM turned her into the symbol of American resilience, but beneath the gowns and the light, control became her survival instinct. Directors described her as tireless, perfectionist, and at times impossible. If a co-star faltered, She would quietly demand another take until her dominance was unmistakable, each motion rehearsed like a soldier's march toward immortality. Her obsession with discipline extended into her home. The accounts from her adopted children, some disputed, others corroborated, revealed a chilling consistency. Structure as punishment, affection traded for obedience, the ironed dresses, the wire hangers, the endless need to prove loyalty. Freeman once observed that Crawford didn't crave love. She craved surrender. It was not cruelty for its own sake, but a hunger to never feel small again, to rewrite a childhood of humiliation into absolute control. Even after Mommy Dearest redefined her legacy, some still defended her, arguing that the cruelty came from fear of fading, of being forgotten, of losing the control that fame once gave her. Her later years, shadowed by isolation and alcohol, carried the quiet tragedy of a woman who could not live without command. Joan Crawford wanted immortality, and she got it, but not the kind she imagined. Her name became synonymous with beauty carved from discipline, power born from pain, and the haunting silence of applause that never ends. Charlie Chaplin, the genius who believed he was untouchable. Chaplin gave the world laughter in poverty and poetry in silence. But off-screen, his personal life was tangled in scandal, relationships with underage women, political manipulation, and a belief that genius excused everything. Freeman noted that Chaplin saw himself as bigger than morality, an artist beyond the law. His art endures. His conscience, many argued, never did. From the kid to modern times, Chaplin built a universe where tenderness conquered cruelty. His Little Tramp was the moral compass of a chaotic age. Yet in life, Chaplin often wielded his intellect like a shield. He dismissed criticism as ignorance, branding his detractors as enemies of art. As his fame grew, so did his sense of immunity. He married young women barely past adolescence and justified his behavior as part of his romantic temperament. The studios, fearing backlash, buried the whispers. His genius made him profitable and therefore untouchable. In the 1940s, political tension added another layer to his downfall. His open sympathies for leftist causes drew the ire of the FBI. But rather than self-reflect, Chaplin framed it as persecution. Freeman once remarked, he believed the camera was confession enough, that the artist's work absolved the man. To the public, Chaplin was still the clown who made the world laugh through tears. To those who knew him, he was a man unbound by guilt, moving through scandal as if it were merely another scene. When he was exiled from America in 1952, he left behind not just his adopted country, but a reputation divided between genius and arrogance. The laughter he created was pure. The life behind it was not. In the end, Chaplin's genius illuminated humanity, but never quite humanized him. He taught the world to find beauty in suffering, but forgot that some suffering was his own making. His story remains a monument to brilliance and to the blindness it can bring. Alfred Hitchcock, the master who tortured for art.
Television, when I was over there, they allow a certain amount of nudity on English television.
Hitchcock turned fear into cinema's purest language, but his control extended beyond the lens. Freeman once remarked that Hitchcock didn't direct women, he possessed them. His treatment of actresses like Tippi Hedren has since become infamous. Psychological games, humiliation, and obsession disguised as direction. For Hitchcock, art justified cruelty. But Freeman's reflection reminds us that genius without empathy becomes tyranny. In the golden era of cinema, Hitchcock's brilliance was absolute. Every frame was a study in manipulation of audience, actor, and emotion. But that same obsession with control spilled into his real life. Hedren later revealed how Hitchcock's fascination became fixation, how his sets turned from creative spaces into prisons of psychological torment. Freeman's tone in reflecting on this history feels both reverent and disillusioned, acknowledging a mind that changed cinema while darkening the lives around it. Behind the camera, Hitchcock treated fear like a raw material. He once said that actors are cattle, and he worked to prove it, testing limits of obedience and endurance. On The Birds, Hedren endured real attacks from live gulls after being assured they would be mechanical. Hitchcock watched from his chair, silent, studying the terror he had orchestrated. To him, suffering was authenticity. To his performers, it was abuse. Colleagues excused him as eccentric, a product of old-school authority. But the stories that surfaced later painted something colder, a man who believed pain could be captured like light. He isolated actresses, sabotaged careers, and blurred the line between obsession and authorship. Yet his films, Vertigo, Psycho, Rear Window, remained untouchable masterpieces that redefined suspense itself. Hitchcock's brilliance was undeniable, but his cruelty was deliberate. He transformed fear into art, but also into currency, traded at the expense of human dignity. For him, terror was both muse and method, beauty and punishment. He made the world scream and left it questioning what kind of man demands such screams to be immortal. Bing Crosby, the velvet voice that hid an iron hand.
Take a spot, cool and hot.
His songs sound like innocence itself, White Christmas, Swinging on a Star. But in private, Crosby was a disciplinarian of terrifying severity. His children later described his home as a kingdom of fear. Freeman observed that Crosby sang of peace because he had none. Behind that calm baritone was a man waging war on his own family, haunted by control and guilt the world never saw. Crosby's public persona was warmth incarnate, the smiling crooner who sang America through war and winter. But within his home, his sons remembered a father who demanded perfection and punished imperfection without mercy. Reports from family accounts and later biographies revealed beatings, emotional distance, and silence that echoed louder than his music. To the outside world, he was grace and gentleness. To those inside, discipline ruled every breath. He grew up hard and carried that hardness with him. To many, discipline was mistaken for strength, but for his family, it was a wall that love could never climb. Freeman reflected that some men mistake control for order and forget that tenderness is the truest authority. The voice that soothed millions could not soften itself at home. Even as his fame endured, the divide between the man and the myth widened. In public, he was America's songbook. In private, he was a storm of cold resolve. After his death, his son's confessions reframed a legacy once thought unblemished. Hollywood mourned its gentleman singer, while his family remembered a ruler trapped inside his own silence. Crosby's story is not just about cruelty. It's about the quiet devastation of authority without compassion, the emotional inheritance of fear disguised as love. His music carried serenity the man himself could never find. His legacy, haunting and complex, reminds us that harmony on record does not always reflect harmony in life, and that even the softest voice can echo with unspoken pain that never fades. Clark Gable, the king who played God.
When I think you could have had my millions if you'd just waited a little while. Oh, how fickle is woman.
To audiences, Clark Gable was the ultimate man, reckless, magnetic, indestructible. But Freeman's quiet observation cuts deeper. Power makes monsters of men who believe they can't fall. On and off set, Gable carried a dangerous arrogance. His affairs, his temper, and his disregard for others' boundaries created scars that never reached the headlines. The legend of Rhett Butler hid a man intoxicated by control. Hollywood worshipped him. Freeman called him what few dared, untouchable, and therefore unaccountable. Gable's confidence was both his weapon and his shield. On camera, he embodied the American ideal of strength. Off camera, he ruled by intimidation. Crew members whispered of his temper, his need to dominate scenes, and his volatile personal life. His relationships with co-stars were as commanding as his performances, an extension of his need to be obeyed, to remind the world who held the power in every frame. The tragedy behind his myth deepened with his involvement in the death of actress Carole Lombard, his beloved wife. Though the plane crash was beyond his control, friends said guilt hardened him further, turning grief into fury. He drowned remorse in alcohol, in conquests, and in silence. Freeman reflected that Gable believed sorrow could be buried under bravado, but it always clawed its way back. The charm remained, the tenderness vanished. As the studio era faded, so did his reign. New stars rose, less gods than men, and Gable struggled to find meaning beyond power. He was too proud to chase the past, too broken to change. Yet, in his eyes, there remained a flicker of the man he once pretended to be, a reminder that even idols long for forgiveness they never earn. Clark Gable's story is a cautionary myth, a man who mistook worship for worth. His strength inspired millions, yet his weakness consumed him. In the end, the man who ruled the silver screen learned the oldest truth in Hollywood. Even kings must answer to their own reflection, and the crown of fame is heavier than it looks. Fame is a mirror. It reflects what we want to see and hides what we can't bear to face. The golden age of Hollywood built gods from fragile men and women, sculpted in light but shadowed in silence. Morgan Freeman's reflection on these stories is not judgment, it's remembrance. A reminder that brilliance and cruelty can live in the same heart, and that history rarely tells them apart. These legends changed cinema, but their legacies remind us that art without empathy leaves ghosts behind. The screen remembers everything: the light, the lies, the longing. Their stories ask a single haunting question: how much of greatness must be paid for in pain? Which of these revelations struck you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value truth over illusion, subscribe and join us as we keep uncovering the stories fame tried hardest to forget.